Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3, testing. Okay, if everybody could make their way to the seats, we're going to try to get started here momentarily. Please come on in if you're in the hall and take a seat. We're going to get started very shortly. We've got people both online and here in the room. We're good? Okay, let's go ahead and get started. First of all, I do want to thank all of you for being here, both here and online. I know we have a number of people in both places, and it's very exciting to be here together, but also in this hybrid environment, and that we can do things in different ways and learn different ways of communicating here on the campus. Let me introduce myself. My name is Rick Coulon. I am the interim CFO and Vice Chancellor for Division of Finance and Administration. And I will be giving one of the presentations today, but I also want to welcome all of you here. We've got many students, faculty, staff, community representatives, University Hills. It's really exciting to see this community coming together to learn and talk and listen about the different events around safety. So thank you. I also want to say thank you and appreciate the work of the PSAC chair, Kelly Sharp, who's here in the front. Thank her and the PSAC team for helping put this event together and allowing us to come together and communicate with one another. So thank you very much. Safety is a very important topic here at UCI and everywhere across the globe. And this is our way of joining together and talking about some of these important initiatives and also hearing feedback from the community. So thank you. I'll go over really quickly the agenda. We are going to talk about the importance of the community of safety here at UCI, and we've got the Provost Hal Stern here to join us for that. I will be talking about the UCI Community Safety Plan and our implementation here of that. Vice Chancellor Doug Haynes will be talking about the Community Safety Update, and then we will have a Q&A panel that's will be moderated by Professor Kelly Sharp. So that is our agenda for the day, and we're looking forward to presenting and then hearing the questions that come forward through that. Next up, I do want to introduce a very distinguished guest speaker. We have our Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor, Hal Stern, who's also the Chancellor's Professor in the Department of Statistics here at UC Irvine. He's previously served as the founding chair of the Department of Statistics, Dean of the Donald Bren School of Information and Computer Sciences, and Vice Provost for Academic Planning. In his role as Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor, he is UCI's Chief Academic and Operating Officer. And so thank you and welcome, Hal Stern.
Thank you, Rick. You saved me from my usual first talking point, which is to explain what the Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor does. It's an honor to be here. I'm really grateful for all of you for being here for the conversation today. It's really important to our community, those who are here in person, those who are participating remotely. I want to echo some of Rick's thanks to start, to thank the Public Safety Advisory Committee for organizing the town hall as a forum for opening lines of communication. I think it's really critical as we think about safety, and especially how we want to think about safety going forward along the lines of the Community Safety Plan. I want to recognize all of the members of PSAC. I want to recognize some of the folks in the leadership level, including Rick, interim CFO and Vice Chancellor, for his efforts in this space, the Vice Chancellor for Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, Doug Haynes, who you'll also hear from, and the UCI Police Department under Chief Liz Griffin. So thank you for all your leadership. Echo Rick again in thanking Kelly Sharp as our PSAC acting chair. Recognize Katie Tinto, who's our chair, now on sabbatical, and though she's just here as audience, Carol Sarrin for her work as the founding chair of the PSAC and the great work that she's done in this space. You know, the bullet says importance of community safety at UCI. It's really interesting to think about because the city of Irvine and UC Irvine, of course, pride themselves on being this incredibly safe environment, and it's really been a huge asset to the campus as we recruit students, faculty, staff. And so I think a lot of what we've seen recently around the world and locally, you know, reinforces that takes effort, that safety takes effort. We start with a great local community, but it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort and best practices, and we have to keep, as in everything we do, have to learn and be in a learning environment. And I want to just note that based on Academic Senate Committee report in 2018, so that's before a lot of the more recent you know, proximate factors, the PSAC was formed at that time in response to the concerns in our community there, and it has continued to grow and evolve, and it is, I think, one of the most important manifestations of our commitment to safety and continuous improvement in all of our processes. And that includes the kinds of things that we're going to be doing under the Community Safety Implementation Plan, rethinking what the models of policing look like at UCI for our campus community, the mix of uniformed and community service officers and the like, revising the police complaint process to make sure that it is open, easily accessible, and responsive, publishing data on UCI policing. Again, I think that's been something we've been pushing towards, and now a lot of external forces pushing in the same direction. So a lot of good things there. And PSAC played a key role in making implicit bias training an important part of something for all of our PD members. And we do that as well on the faculty and staff side to encourage, a community that's safe and welcoming. So that's kind of the major contributions of PSAC. In 2020, PSAC led an external review of the UCI PD. So we hired someone to come in, and they did a very deep dive, spoke to all of campus leadership, a variety of other interested parties on campus, provided a comprehensive report, made a number of recommendations to us, to PSAC formally. PSAC, reviewed those, essentially endorsed them, a little change, pushed them to the chancellor, who also endorsed them. And so, I think in spring 2021, the chancellor put out, what we think we want to do. And as I describe it, you'll see it's very closely aligned with where the Office of the President ended up in their community safety plan. Specifically, there's a recommendation to develop a mission and a set of core values for campus safety envisioned by our community. Second, improvement in data collection and management to be continually monitoring, assessing, and evaluating the efficacy and practices of the police department to determine what services are needed and to be able to evolve over time. Third, create a more responsive complaint and investigative process and feedback mechanism to promote safety, expectations, and community standards. And fourth, align performance standards with campus safety standards and values as determined by our community. And so those are the guidelines that we're now operating under. And as I said, roughly at the same time as we're going through this process, President Drake and the system-wide is going through their own process. And so they, based on input from students, faculty, and staff, various task forces like ours, and a couple of UC-wide symposium events. I was able to participate in the first of those, but not the second. They had really online, large participation from a broad set across all of the campuses, and that led to the UCOP Community Safety Plan. And that plan has guidelines that are incredibly closely aligned to the four things I just described, such that I don't feel the need to repeat them here. But again, the focus is data-driven, service-oriented, community-centric approach to campus safety. And they're targeting across all UC campuses. And so the campuses have been charged with developing, implementing a community safety plan that Rick will talk about, that, you know, just a couple of key points is really trying to figure out a comprehensive wraparound support model that uses campus safety officers, mental health professionals, campus police, social service providers, police accountability boards, all working together to get the community safe and to keep the community safe. And as part of that, and there's a very elaborate part that we'll probably go through, of checkpoints and times by which we need to achieve certain goals. And the campus, again, leadership, Rick, Doug, Liz, we're doing a great job, but a lot of work to be done. But I think we're very well aligned. And as I close, I just want to, you know, reinforce the fact, again, something I think we all know, but the notion of community safety impacts all of us every day in all of our interactions. And it therefore is critical that we all spend the time to get it right. And so I thank you today for being here to be a part of getting it right. That is to help us engage in the process, to get your questions asked and answered, to learn what we are doing, to give feedback about how we can do it better. And so I am unfortunately not able to stay, but I hope that it turns out to be, and I'm sure that it will, a very productive meeting. So thank you again all for being here, and best of luck. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Provost Stern. Appreciate the words and for taking the time to be here. So I do want to talk about the UCI Community Safety Plan implementation. And in order to do that, we should talk a little bit about the UC system-wide Community Safety Plan. Provost Stern gave you a good rendition of what that is, and so we'll probably go through that part a little bit quickly. As he indicated, it's very similar to the principles that UCI came up with in planning for our own safety here on the campus. And so let me just start by saying that the concept around this is to make sure that all of our students, staff, faculty, visitors on campus can be confident that there's a supportive environment here that is responsive to their needs. And so the Community Safety Plan sets forth sort of that structure to help achieve those goals as we move forward. And as the Provost said, that President Drake had formed various groups to look at this and develop a UC Community Safety Plan by talking with all of the campuses, all of the chancellors, many of the stakeholders, and try to come up with some key principles. And so with that, there was the development of this safety plan. And the four key principles are listed here, and that is community and service-driven safety. And so we want to make sure that the practices reflect the values that we have here at the university and of our diverse values and principles that we have in our community. And so if it's not serving those goals, then we need to examine why is that. We also want to have a holistic and tiered response model. So we want to look at campus safety as beyond just what are the police doing, right? We need to look at basic needs. We need to look at mental health. We need to look at all the different components that go together to create health and safety here at UC Irvine or across the UC system, and make sure that when we respond to things that we're looking at that in that holistic viewpoint and not just from one small, narrow view. Also, we want to have transparency and continuous improvement through data. So we're a research university. We're very good at data. We should be collecting data and using that data to help inform our decisions. And so when we look at policing, when we look at safety, when we look at other health issues, we want to make sure that we're collecting data and then reviewing that data to help us inform us as to what's the right direction, what are the right things to be doing. And so with that, the UC has started to collect that information, putting that on a dashboard that people can review and see. And then finally, there's accountability and oversight. And this is to ensure that we have investigation processes that we can use to make sure that when there are things happen that they were done correctly and properly. We want to make sure that that investigation can take place and that it's consistent with the rules that we have here at the university and within the community. We want to have police accountability boards where there are outside sort of viewpoints and a broad section of UC can be represented on those boards to help evaluate and understand what's needs to be looked at and where the concerns might lie. And so these are some of the very important key principles that the UC system has set up and all the campuses are following as we move forward with our community safety plans. There's also a couple of work groups that we wanted to mention that are also important to know about. So the UC system has established a work group on vehicles, uniforms, and equipment. This is co-chaired by our own Vice Chancellor, Willie Banks in Student Affairs, who is helping to lead that effort. And they're looking at things like, you know, uniforms. We should be able to quickly identify who is a police officer and who's not a police officer. We should be able to look at vehicles and understand, is this a police vehicle or is this a different public safety vehicle? And so there's a lot of work being done to try to pull together this final report and issue some broad-ranging rules that the UC will follow to help us guide us in that way. There's also the creation of what we discussed as the system-wide data dashboard. And this is where all of the UC campuses will be giving information to UC, especially about some of our policing activities, to talk about our stops, to talk about the crimes that we have on campus, to talk about those activities that are going on, and publish those in a way that people can see them and understand them and have quick access to them. And so those are what's going on from sort of the system-wide standpoint. As we move to UC Irvine's implementation of that, each chancellor was asked to name a responsible officer for helping to implement this at UCI. Prior to my appointment as interim CFO and vice chancellor, Ron Cortez was in this position, and he had that role. I have now inherited that role, and I'm continuing to move forward with that process, but I'm not doing that in a vacuum. So we have a very high-level team of UCI administrators, many of them at the cabinet level, as you'll see here. We've got Ramona Agrella, Willie Banks, Andrea Eaton, Doug Haynes, Lars Walton, Kirsten Quanbeck, who's here, Liz Griffin, David Ott, and Mary Clark are all part of the executive work group that's helping to put the pieces together, to go out and do outreach with different communities and help put this together. And I'll let you know that PSAC has played a very important and pivotal role in these groups and in the conversation that's going on here at UCI. So we did want to just show you a little bit more of the highlights of what's happening here at UCI. And so when we look at community and service-driven safety, again, we want to look at that holistic framework that's being done. And Vice Chancellor Haynes has established a campus safety task force that has helped to look at the development of campus safety framework in a very holistic way and looking at all the different activities that we do and ensuring that we're not just narrowly focused. And so thank you, Vice Chancellor Haynes, for that. And with that, he's also looked at ensuring that we've got principles of safety, security, and justice that are built into our framework. We have opportunities for community feedback. The police has now installed a system called Spider Tech, which helps give people the ability to respond to an incident. So if you've had an incident, they're going to give you information about, you know, the call was responded to, and do you have questions about that, and how can we help you? And so this customer satisfaction tool helps us gauge whether or not the police are doing the right job and being responsive to the needs of the community. There's also been a campus-wide safety survey led again by Vice Chancellor Haynes that he's going to be talking about in great detail later today. And so, again, these are some of the things that have been implemented. Police contact. All the police department members are now, when they respond to an incident, they're telling who they are, why they're there, making sure that that information is provided up front. Also giving contact information on cards with a QR code that you can scan and give customers response and information back to the university on that, and their customer satisfaction survey. So really important tools that are now being implemented to help the community communicate with the police and with the administration here at UCI. Police hiring practices have been used to include the community in those hirings, bring in folks from PSAC to help make those hiring decisions. And so very important that we have members of the community serving on those hiring panels and giving input onto who we want to have here representing UCI. Want to talk a little bit about the tiered response model, which is sort of our second principle. This is where the university has a number of different groups on campus that help support our campus with things like, mental health, with counseling, with the police department, with alcohol use and abuse. So all these groups sort of have been working independently, and what we want to do is we want to make sure that they're sort of communicating and they're working together. And so we're bringing them together into a campus safety partners group that can then discuss different issues, understand how one group might help the other group, and we can continue to grow. And with that, we've also developed and are working to implement the executive work group, campus safety executive work group, which will then help to respond to the needs of that CSPG group, and where there's need for policy change or something to help move things along better, we can have that high-level response and make that happen. Let's talk a little bit more about transparency and continuous improvement through data. So I'm very pleased that our police department was one of the very first to implement a data dashboard and really be a leader with the UC system. So not only is the UC system collecting some of this information, but if you go to the UCI PD website, you will find our data dashboard there that gives you information on the different arrests, the different issues going on within UCI PD. And so there's really a great deal of information that you can get from perusing that website. Wanted to also talk about our Police Accountability Board, which is something that's currently being worked on, developed. PSAC is involved. Kirsten Quanbeck is helping to lead the effort at UCI to develop what our model should be, and it's sort of based upon what UC Davis is doing and has been doing for many years. But of course, we need to make sure that that fits with our culture and what we need. And so we have a team that's looking at that. We also have the police department is in the process of getting accredited by IACLEA, which is a outside group that looks at educational police departments and makes sure that we're following the standards that exist throughout the nation and that we're meeting our own obligations here at UCI. And so it's really a great step up to be certified by the IACLEA group and have that independent third party look at what we're doing. So with that, I do want to refer everyone to the Community Safety Plan website. I'm sure this will be posted, but please check that out. You can find more information about the UCOP Community Safety Plan. And also want to thank PSAC for all of their work in this process and going through that. I want to thank the executive work group that's been helping to implement these issues here across the campus, and to Chief Griffin and our police department for being very open and willingness to participate and assist in this process in a very open manner. So thank you very much. With that, I would like to introduce Vice Chancellor Doug Haynes. Doug is our Chief Diversity Officer, Vice Chancellor for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and he's going to help provide an update on the PSAC recommendations and the preview of our UCI policing survey. So thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Rick, and good afternoon to everyone on this beautiful Southern California day, and I want to extend that to our viewers on YouTube. About this time last year, Chancellor Gilman communicated to the campus his strong support for PSAC's recommendations for transforming public safety here at UCI. And as part of that embrace of that report and recommendations, he directed me to form a work group that was concerned with the implementation of the recommendations. And I want to acknowledge members of that work group who represent equity stakeholders from across the campus, including undergraduate leaders, graduate student leaders, staff leaders, and faculty leaders. And we really concerned ourselves with three key concepts. The first is, what is safety? Right? And it's important to remember that at any one time when we're in person, this campus includes nearly 50,000 or more people. And a significant share of them are here for 4 years, or maybe a little more. But often individuals are bringing their own experiences and expectations of what safety means, while at the same time navigating career and learning here at UCI. And so one of the first tasks of this work group was actually to define, what do we mean by safety? Because if we don't have a definition of safety that is shared, it becomes very difficult to know not only what we mean by safety, but how do we realize it as a community? The second activity that we focused on is, what does it mean? And so I'll be describing briefly a new course we developed that forms a part of the OIE Inclusive Excellence Certificate Program. And part of the purpose of this course is to engage a diverse community of learners at UCI, including undergraduates and graduate students, staff employees, and faculty employees, to sort of explore what we mean by safety, right? And the third update that I want to share is just to provide a very high-level overview of the responses to a community safety survey that was administered over the past 2.5 months. And it's high level in part because the survey closed on April 29th, and we're still in the process of analyzing the data. And so the first activity of the work group that I think is particularly consequential is to create a framework, right? We've never had a definition of safety here at UCI, at least one that was broadly understood. And so this was a product of a wide discussion, and I'm providing an overview of it. And at the core of it is the idea that mutual respect for human dignity is particularly important to what we mean by safety. And at the heart of safety is three principles. One is safety, and I'll talk about that momentarily. The other is security, and the third is justice. Now, at first sight, these are very common terms in the general vocabulary of each person. But it's important to note what we mean by them. Safety refers as much to identity safety as it does physical safety. That is to say that you feel safe in bringing your whole self to UCI, to work, to learn, to be a patient. It's also about physical safety. But bringing these two concepts together is at the core of safety. It's as much about how we treat each other, right, as it is about protecting ourselves from threats. The second principle is security. And security refers to protecting our rights as individuals, while we work and learn here at UCI, as well as efforts that are taken to create a sense of security for all. And often, this refers to the nest of policies, federal and state laws, as well as individuals, uniformed police officers, individuals that have certification that provides very specific duties and responsibilities in order to support people and to protect their rights. Right? The third is justice. And this is about promoting human rights for all through individual accountability and collective accountability. All these three principles work together, right? They're stronger because they interact to each other. And they're most effective to the extent that all members of the campus community understand what we mean by safety and the principles that underlie them. And so that's why this quarter, now when I acknowledge my colleague, Dr. Joseph Morales, he and I developed an elective course. And this is part of our Inclusive Excellence Certificate Program. And this program requires 20 hours where an individual completes a core course and an elective. The community safety is one of the electives. And this particular course really explores safety, in part because we want to ensure that people are comfortable talking about what safety is. And we also want to explore the meanings of the three principles. Right? And so the course combines common readings and screenings of relevant content online, as well as moderated discussion. And the participants really are exploring three basic questions in relationship to the principle of safety, security, and justice. The first is, what is safety? Right? And as I mentioned earlier, it's about identity safety as well as physical safety. And so that means, depending on who you are, you may feel less safe or more safe, depending on if the environment you operate in supports you and recognizes your whole self. The second question refers to the first. Who gets to be safe? It's important to remember that Irvine is the most safe city of its size in the country. And UCI is undoubtedly one of the safest campuses of its size in the country. But it's still possible for individuals to feel unsafe, right? Now, that's a pretty powerful contradiction. It's important for us as a community to understand who people are so we, in our own way, can help promote a sense of safety for all. And that's why we established this course, so that we can become more accustomed to trying to understand these concepts together. And then the third is, who is responsible for safety? Right? Now, that question elicits a wide range of responses from participants in the class. Some immediately assume it's uniform officers. And in some cases, that's the case. Whereas for others, it's each of us, right? It's each of us to know who our community is. It's incumbent on us to know who is our community, are they thriving, and how do we know and how can we improve? And so as we sort of think about the framework for community safety at UCI, it's about each of us contributing to the safety of other people. And that is in line with the aspirations of President Drake's community safety vision, as well as PSAC's recommendation for a safer UCI community. And so far I talked about the definition of safety, and admittedly, it's an early step. We really haven't done this before as a campus. We're 57 years old, and we've discovered safety. But in order for it to be a reality, we need to remember that the transformation of safety at UCI is a massive educational project, that we have to be more self-aware. We have to be prepared to learn about other people who constitute parts of this UCI community. And it's a process of virtual improvement that we're always trying to grow. So I talked about what is safety, but also how we sort of think about it. Next, I want to provide an overview, and this is a very high-level overview about responses to our very first community safety survey. And I want to acknowledge my colleagues, Dr. Joseph Metters, for really assisting and creating this administration of the survey. And I want to provide a little background, because the survey itself was developed by People's Lab, and that is housed at UC Berkeley. And in partnership with the Public Safety Advisory Council, we decided to customize that for UCI, right? So the questions were part of an instrument that grew out of an experience through People's Lab, and in partnership with PSAC and an external consultant, we modified it, right? And so this is an overview. And so we launched the survey on February 15th. Prior to that, we mobilized different organizations and people on campus to raise awareness about this survey. We realize that many people are over-surveyed. We understand that. But we felt this was the only way to begin to understand what does the UCI community think about safety. And so this is a pilot, and we'll learn from this pilot in future administrations of the survey, right? So it was administered for about 2.5 months. As a result of our efforts, about 3,500 people from various parts of the campus community completed the survey. It's under 10% overall response rate at a very sort of rough, raw level. But I think it's important for us to understand that this was not only the first administration, but about 3,500 people decided to share their points of view. And for that reason, we want to take that very seriously and to see it as a starting point for learning more information. And so some of the high-level observations that we can make is that not many people who completed the survey have had direct interactions with UCI PD. Right? And so we need to explore more about those responses. Second, I think it's important to note that when we consider the majority of the responses, for the most part, they see UCI PD as making the campus safer. And that refers to both the UCI Irvine campus as well as the campus in Orange where the medical center is located. Okay. The majority of respondents trust UCI PD's decision-making and competence whether or not they have personally interacted with them. Right? Second, stops by UCI PD are relatively infrequent, but potentially disproportionate in terms of specific populations. Right? And third, rather not third, and I think this is a particularly important overview, is that most respondents want UCI PD to retain at least some responsibility in their various roles and support training-based strategies rather than UCI PD reductions in the force. Right? So those are just several of some of the early input that we've been able to capture. We'll be spending the summer really working through this data and produce a more complete report that will be generally circulated to the campus. What I'd like to do now is just to sort of look at some of the characteristics of who completed the survey. Right? And so what's striking is that when you look at this pie chart, it's pretty clear that staff were quite active in completing the survey. We made a concerted effort to work with HR. We want to acknowledge their engagement team, as well as Chancellor Gilman communicated a report in which he requested supervisors to provide some release time for staff members to complete the survey. We also, I want to acknowledge the ACU-CCI that also had me at their Senate meeting to raise awareness about the survey. But you can also see from other parts of the pie chart that we got different constituency groups at different levels completing the survey. When you look at the distribution by gender, women are well represented and completed the survey. And in some sense, that relates to the overall size of the staff, the composition of the staff population and the undergraduate population. I want to note that this survey, we also were very deliberate and really seeking to have as many indicators for gender, so not only male, female, but also non-binary. If you look at the ethnicity characteristics, about 30% white, about 28% Asian, and about 14% Latino completed the survey. Did I get that right? I think I did. Just give me 1 second as I can work through my notes here. And we also attempted to sort of capture sexual orientation. And so the overwhelming majority of folks who completed, and again, the 3,500 people who completed identify as heterosexual. And you'll notice in each of these pie charts, whether we're looking at gender or personnel category, that a significant number of people declined to state, right? And that is something that we really want to explore further. And so I want to draw your attention to some of the comments I made at the beginning that has to do with some of the strategies or reforms as it relates to the UCI Police Department. If you take a look at the set of bars here, when you look at support for strategies or reforms around change, the most popular suggestions are related to providing trainings. And you sort of see that in the bars that run from 70% about information reports, civil rights interaction training for the community, de-escalation for mental health. So you understand that it's the responses strongly suggest more training, more opportunities for making a more robust, responsive community, but also a police department, right? If you look at the top bar, and this has to do with reducing the number of police departments, police officers, That was the lowest, right? Other strategies or reforms, I think it's pretty clear that when you look at the two areas that really stand out for improving, one is to require mental health professionals for patrol officers, right? And that's something that I think was loud and clear in February during the two symposia that President Drake hosted. And I do believe that there is considerable activity that's taking place locally to provide that. I think the other area for improvement has to do with providing a 24-hour non-UCI PD hotline for nonviolent crime. And this is in line with the idea of really trying to have a new model, a more holistic model of safety, one that doesn't necessarily default to call the UCI PD for all types of safety concerns. I want to move to roles and responsibilities for the UCI Police Department. If you take a look, the red refers to no responsibility, the yellow to some responsibility, and the green to complete responsibility. And most respondents believe UCI PD should have at least some responsibility for the given activities that are sort of listed in these different bars, with the most responsibility suggested for patrol, security, and crowd management, and the least responsibility for engaging with campus community groups. I want to move on to the next slide that looks at another set of activities regarding roles and responsibility. And here, most respondents believe UCI PD should have at least some responsibility for given activities, but most responsibility for criminal investigations. The least responsibility for responding to behavioral mental health crises and workplace conflicts. Right? There's also a large amount of support for handling emergency preparedness training and connecting individuals to supportive services whenever UCI PD is called to respond to a potentially traumatic event. And then the final set of questions that references roles and responsibilities, in this case, it's clear that most respondents believe that UCI PD should have at least some responsibility for given activities, with the most for responding to violent incidences, and the least responsibility for responding to incidences involving unhoused individuals. Okay? And so, like I said, we've only had the data for about 2.5 weeks, maybe 3. This is just a high-level overview of some of the findings. We'll be spending the better part of the summer really digging into this to produce a complete report that we'll be making available to the entire campus. And we're doing this in part because of transparency, in part because we see safety as an iterative process, right? That we're going to grow as we learn more, and particularly as people engage with the campus. And so we have a 4-step process. We plan to complete our report sometime this summer. The data will be available on the OIE dashboard, so you could look at it at any time of the day or night. Third, we're going to begin with briefings about the survey results this summer, and that will continue into the fall. If you have an organization or an office that's interested in a briefing about the data, please let us know, right? We will reach out as much as we can, but I want you to know we welcome people's questions and the opportunity to share the results and discuss them with you. And fourth, we will incorporate the results in our community safety course, right? And as I wrap up, I just want to point out that, you know, safety has to be seen as an integral component of our aspirations to be a great public research university, right? We could no longer delegate it to one part of the campus. It's now a responsibility that the campus has fully embraced, as has the system. But it's equally important that each member, whether you are a student, an undergraduate or graduate student, a staff employee or faculty employee, even an alum, that you engage with campus safety, because when you do, I believe we're far better off than when we don't. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Doug. Really appreciate the presentation and look forward to the deeper dive into the survey results. Excellent. I'd like to take a quick detour from our agenda and just take a few moments to recognize and thank Carol Sarrin, who has advised us that she's stepping down from her role with PSAC and going to be continuing to do other things with the university. But she is founding chair of PSAC, has really given her great service to this group. Carol Sarrin is professor emerita in the Department of Criminology, Law and Society. She has a courtesy appointment with the Department of Sociology, and she studies organizations and culture and the culture of professions, including law, policing, and engineering. And throughout her career, her research has asked whether and to what extent organizations deliver on their promise to ensure equity and fairness in the delivery of their services. And so as chair of the PSAC committee, Carol sought to bring some of that research and expertise into PSAC here at UCI and help us to see if we're meeting those obligations and doing those things. And so I do want to ask that you all join me in thanking her for her important work and her relationship here to UCI. And we have a little gift for Carol, if you'll come up and get that. Also, I'll just mention that in her retirement, she's also working with colleagues at UC Irvine to develop a demonstration project to extend access to currently incarcerated students to earn a BA degree through the University of California. Thank you, Carol. So next, I'd like to introduce Professor Kelly Sharp, who will serve as our moderator for the panel discussion. Dr. Kelly Sharp is the acting chair of PSAC, as Professor Katie Tinto is on sabbatical. Professor Sharp is assistant professor in the Department of Dance in the Claire Trevor School of the Arts and is also co-director of iMove in the Stem Cell Research Center. So if you'll thank me or thank her and welcome her to the stand when she's ready. Thank you, Professor Kelly Sharp. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, everyone. I look forward to this discussion and really would like to set the tone for the next 45 minutes to an hour that we have. We've come together today to have an open conversation and dialogue. And it's really important that we focus on the principles that Vice Chancellor Haynes was talking about as we move forward through this conversation. So thank you very much. And with that, I would like to invite the panelists to come up. I'm looking for everyone. So if you want to come up and join us. So how this is going to work, while they're walking up here, I will discuss how this is going to work. We'll take questions. We have questions on two modes. One is we'll take questions from the audience, and you can see that there are microphones There are 3 of them, one to the right, one in the middle, and one to the left. Well, my left. And then what we'll do is we also have questions coming in from the YouTube. So, but first, I would like for Yosef and Reginald to introduce themselves, because they're and the chief, to do a quick introduction and tell us who you are. That would be great. Oh.
Test. Okay, cool.
Thank you.
So hi, my name is Yusuf. I am the current undergraduate student government president with ASUCI. I'm also a 5th-year computer science major, and I'm about to graduate in a month. So it's one of the last things I'm doing. So.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Reginald. I'm a 4th-year PhD student in the Department of Informatics, hosted in the Donald Brent School of Computer and Information Science. I am been a member of PSAC for the last 3 years, and I will be the incoming president of AGS UCI next year.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Liz Griffin. I'm the chief of police here at UC Irvine, and I've been here for about 3 years now and coming in with almost 30 years of law enforcement experience.
Well, thank you very much. All right, so we would like to invite anybody from the audience to start us off with a question. Please come up to the mic and you can address your question. Oh, it's not on. Thank you.
Great, thank you. My question is about safety, security, and justice for all. So I have 3 related questions that I will actually read. What are the UC and police plans in regards to preventing misuse of power in activation of false alarm? This includes activation of police department or using ZOT or other means in regards to non-violent and peaceful individuals for any reason, including racism or retaliation. What are the rights of the individual whose civil rights have been violated? And 3, what kind of accountability are we talking about for those who have activated a false alarm? Thanks.
All right, thank you very much for your question. Would any of the panelists like to answer that?
I'm not sure I really understand what the question is, but I'm going to give it a try where I think you're trying to go with this. Are you talking about people who use law enforcement to promote their needs? Is that what you're talking about?
No.
Okay.
So, for example, we had an event in Central Park, New York. A white woman was jogging and then accused a black man of harassing her, which was false. There is a insult to the accused person. So, and I don't think that is an isolated event. That can happen anywhere and can be racism or any other reason behind it. So my question basically is, what are the process to also protect the person who is wrongfully accused? And a system has been activated. There's a slender component to this. And what is this person's right, and what are the accountability for those who activate this false system? I hope this is more clear.
It is. Thank you very much. And I think, I'm sure Doug will probably want to, Dr. Haynes will probably want to jump in on this as well. But at UC Irvine, we have quite a few mechanisms in place. And I know Kirsten's looking at me right now because she's actually in charge of campus climate and whistleblower. And that's where a lot of this information that we get that happens on campus comes through. And we work together as partners, Kirsten Shop, Dr. Haynes Shop, and myself, to address these problems. We've done many different things as far as law enforcement's concerned, and I'll let Doug answer for campus-wide. But as far as law enforcement's concerned, we've had to actually contact people, have discussions with them. Sometimes we give them a letter saying that they can't come on campus. So there's a lot of things that we do to help prevent this kind of stuff, and provide education for people who may be doing things that are not appropriate to happen on campus. But we do have those avenues. We have the police department you can call. We have the whistleblower that could be anonymous, and Campus Climate. And whether you're the victim of it or you're the one reporting it or you're on the other end of it, you can put that information into that system, and then we'll use all our campus entities to help solve whatever problem that is.
I want to thank you also for that question, because it's pretty clear that the misuse of law enforcement to perpetuate agendas that you sort of described does occur. And I think that the mechanisms that the chief described are available for individuals to file reports about alleged violations of their rights. Right? I think one thing that we're really hoping as the survey gets more traction is that we learn more about how people are, whether or not people are being stopped, and what is the occasion for the stop, right? Because we want to create an environment where if people make a service call to the police, it's for a valid reason, right? And so one way to sort of promote that is really to solicit the input from the campus community about their perceived and real encounters with the police, but also to encourage folks that they feel that they are being unfairly targeted to submit a report, right? And I want to stress that, because the more information we have, I believe, the better we're able to be responsive.
And just to touch one more thing on that is, we have a lot of residential places here, and as we know, neighbors don't always get along for whatever reasons. What we're doing in the police department is we're tracking those types of calls that come in, and when we see kind of repeat offenders, somebody who's always calling on their neighbors for minor offenses like, I smell marijuana, or, their music is too loud and I can't sleep at, 11 o'clock at night. And then we're working with housing, and we will work with University Hills to see if they can handle it outside of the police department, so law enforcement doesn't have to get involved and they can handle those situations outside. So we are using our campus partners to handle some of these things that people are calling us about, and we're recognizing that they're using us as a tool.
All right, thank you very much. So I'm going to go ahead and read a question that came in from YouTube. And the question is, was the UCI PD officer Trish Harding ever held accountable for assaulting a Black alumni in Aldrich Hall during a protest in 2020 the alumni was unaffiliated with?
I guess that's a question for me. So that situation, so just so everybody knows what happened with that, because that was quite a few years ago. But there was a full investigation completed, and no, she has not been disciplined. The investigation was completed with campus leadership being involved. It went to an outside entity that completed the investigation and found that there was no law violations, procedure violations, or policy violations during that incident.
Thank you very much, Chief Griffin. I'd like to take another question from the audience.
Hi, so I'm sorry if I start to ramble, but hopefully there's a question that can be pulled from it. So I'm definitely, and I wrote it down, so I'm just gonna go ahead and read it. So I'm definitely for a safer and more trusting environment. I love the campus survey. I love how many options there were, but unfortunately, as you know, only 3,500 people completed it. There's 30,000 undergraduates, 6,000 graduates, and I have no idea how many staff or faculty is on campus. And okay, so sorry. And okay, so all the strategies listed seem to be headed in the right direction, but to me, there's kind of like a larger question of what kind of backlash is going to be faced for reforms, I guess, in the sense of there's been a couple incidents on campus just this year. Dr. Haynes, you had to retract your Rittenhouse statement because of backlash. I, unfortunately, was saddened by the fact that that had to be backlash, and I'm also saddened by admin's lack of denouncing white supremacy during our last during two instances this year. So at the same time, like, we're getting this community safety survey in one, but then also at the same time, like, admin has a chance to make a difference, but also it doesn't seem like a lot of people, or, because with the whole Rittenhouse incidents, of course there's backlash, or like, if there's backlash, I don't know where I'm going for this, but, sorry, just let me look at this. I guess, so how does UCI actually plan to follow through with these changes, but also considering a reaction from the audience of the 3,500 people who didn't fill out the survey, I guess is where I'm going. Sure.
Thank you for your question, and it wasn't rambling. I think that the 3,500 people made this a priority, right? And the way I'm approaching it is that the campus will continually engage with people to learn. Because as we make these changes, we not only need to sort of make people aware of them, educate folks, train our law enforcement representatives or campus security officers and others, but we need to let people know what we're doing. I think that, you know, the pushback can exist in a lot of different ways. The 30,000 people that decide not to take the survey can be a form of pushback, right? Or it could be, maybe this is the first time, right? And so I think it's incumbent on us to continue doing the work, right? And also to remind people about our values and what we do. And I guess my final point is that people will disagree, right? But I also need to point something out. If I get hate mail, right, that doesn't stop me, right? And I think that, you know, I need to sort of let you know that, because there's all types of resistance. And it's not just about campus safety, right?
Yeah.
But we try to respond to the best of our ability.
Okay, and then just to follow up on the white supremacy, how come admin, at least some admin, didn't want to make a statement? Because if we're talking about forming a safe environment, there's a number of students that were targeted, not specifically a number of students, but like students were targeted in those, I guess, attacks, and admin just kind of said, oh, well, it felt like nothing was said.
Well, actually, so far as I understand, right, so I'm not disagreeing with you. What I'm trying to do is point out that where incidents took place, particularly in the context of housing, as I understand it, there was a response by the housing professional staff in relation to these incidences. Now, it may be that might not be enough, but I do think there was a response to try to address those decals, I think, as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you so much.
I can finish that answer for you too as well. I personally got a call from the chancellor to say, what are we doing about this? So he was definitely concerned about it. And I did remember a message going out. I don't remember coming from the chancellor. But it was something that we took seriously and we addressed right away.
Okay.
That was a great question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to take a question that is actually from YouTube, and it says, how is campus kept safe, specifically family housing, during nighttime hours? It seems as though most crimes that occur happen at night. That's definitely you, Chief Griffin.
It's definitely me. Gotcha. I'm not sure that's accurate, that most crimes occur at night. I'd have to check the numbers again, but I'm pretty sure that is not accurate. What we're seeing both at the medical center and on campus, that majority of the things that are happening during the daytime. But we do work closely with our housing. We are going to bring, talk about that tiered response, and it's a good time for me to put a plug in. If my PSOs can stand up, please. We are doing a tiered response now where we have public safety officers who are unarmed officers that will be on campus helping us with certain calls for service, and our plan is to have them, you guys can sit down now, thanks. Our plan is to have them help us out with some of the housing things that are non-criminal in nature, so hopefully we'll be able to see that out there more to help with either the perception or the idea of crimes happening during the day and night. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to just bring one talking point back in, and then we'll get back to the questions in the audience. One thing that's really important that I know that you've been working on, Chief Griffin, is really how to address how we're going to respond to police calls. Like, what is the plan for that?
So, yeah, I wouldn't say non-police because a
Okay,
lot of
yeah.
people think police should respond to a lot of things. I would say non-criminal type
Criminal,
calls.
thank you.
And that's where we have our tiered response. Right now, we have our CSOs. You guys want to stand up really quick? Our community service officers. And you guys can sit down. I won't make you stand up. They are already on campus and help with a lot of things like escort and things like that people call for the police department, but are non-criminal in nature. And so we're just going to grow that with adding the PSOs to that so that we can handle more things that are non-criminal in nature with people who are not carrying guns and in police uniforms.
What about the mental health? Could you talk a little bit about
So
OCR?
sure, yeah, the mental health. So we're working on it right now. Currently, we have a pilot program that we started in, I think it was December of 2020, where we have a individual clinician who is from the Orange County Healthcare Agency who comes on campus once a week, works with our police officers. They'll respond with us to any mental health calls, and they'll also follow up on any mental health calls we had during the week, because he only comes once a week. Any calls that we've had during the week that maybe they didn't want to use campus resources, but we want to make sure that they get at least some resources. So our clinician will go out and follow up with those individuals. So we're hoping to grow that. Not sure how we're going to do that yet. We're looking at a couple of different programs. So we're hoping, I hope by this summer we'll at least have an idea of a good program in place besides just the once a week guy we have now.
Thank you very much. I welcome more questions from the audience.
Hi, my name is Megan Chamaza. I just wanted to start, I guess I'll go in chronological order with my questions, and this kind of ties directly into what you just said right now. So last year I was an RA in Middle Earth Housing, and I actually had to respond to a mental health call. And I know you said that you have somebody meeting with the police department once a week, I think. And so my question is, how are you enforcing, or how are you checking to make sure that what you're learning is actually being used? Because the amount of force I saw from the police with this student was really disturbing. I was so deeply disturbed, I had to file a report to my RLC and talk about how scared I was to leave that student with the police after I left. Not only did that happen, but I was also accosted by one of the police officers because he couldn't follow directions. But everyone else was able to find the location that I was at. And so hearing that you are talking to them once a week is good, but I would have never guessed that there are people talking to them and training them to deal with these situations because of the level of violence and force, and also a lot of verbal degradation coming from them to that student. It took me and another professional staff member to actually step in and say, you know what, you need to relax. They're obviously going through something right now. So how are you checking to make sure they're actually using those things in training?
That's a great question. I don't know about the incident you're talking about. I'd love to know when and where and what time that happened, because we do wear body-worn cameras and we review those. So if you're telling me something happened, please follow up with one of those guys back there in the uniform there. They'll give them the information, a date and time, and we will look into that, because we do watch a lot of body-worn camera, and we have actually other leadership on campus that watch those with us on occasion, and we'll look and see how the officers are handling mental health. And for the most part, from what I've seen, they're doing it very well. And I don't see a lot of use of force with mental health. We did change some of our procedures because a use of force never looks good. Anytime a police officer puts their hands on anybody, it never looks good. And so one way we're trying to avoid that is we changed our policy on transporting mental health when we have to transport them, because we've I say 5150, what's the, when we come in for a mental health evaluation, we used to transport them. When we transport anybody in a police car, we put them in handcuffs. Well, we realized that's not the right way to transport somebody who's suffering from a mental health crisis. So we changed our policy. If they're nonviolent and they're not fighting or anything, then we don't put handcuffs on them, right? So we're already learning and changing some of the things we do, but I'd really like to look into your incident. I will tell you that the Spider Tech program that we have in place now, we're feedback. We're getting a lot of feedback on people that we're helping with mental health, and we're getting good feedback. You know, that the officers were empathetic, they were compassionate, they treated us with care. Thank you very much. Thank you for taking care of my child. Things like that we are getting good feedback. So if there's something we are doing wrong, please let me know about it. I would like to watch, the body-worn camera and look into the situation. And if we are doing something wrong, or if an officer is not doing things the way we are training them to do it, then we want to provide that training and make sure they are doing things the right way. Thank you for that.
Of course. And then my second question, I'm currently now a CA, a community soul, and I think you mentioned the PSOs, is that what they're called? So I've also been made aware that there are a lot of situations that we're supposed to respond to, which don't really seem safe. Directly speaking about myself, I received a call from these girls in an apartment where a stranger was banging at their door repeatedly, and after they kept asking him to leave, he wouldn't leave. And they were terrified. And so they called me and asked if I could call the police. And so when I called my professional staff to see if I could call the police, they told us, well, they don't really like when we call them for things like that in case it's a false alarm. But I'm literally 5'3", and I had to go respond to that, and somebody that wasn't working had to come with me. He got out of his apartment in the middle of the night to come with me to make sure I was safe in doing that. And so my question there is, if we're not supposed to call you for things like that, what are we supposed to rely on you for?
So I would say if you ever feel unsafe and that you could be in physical harm, you always call us. And I know there's a fine line right now. Us as a campus are trying to figure out when you should call the police, when you shouldn't, when do you want the police to be there. And there's some people on campus that don't want the police to come even if a crime was committed, right? So I think you have to look at it. If there's danger to anybody, you should be calling us, right? And let us de-escalate, and then we'll get the resources we need. We are asking that housing handle certain things. For example, I mentioned earlier about a neighbor calling on a neighbor. There's obviously something going on there, and they're using us. They're calling us for loud music, which is a crime, right? Technically, it's a minor violation, but it's still a crime. So they're calling us. And we're now going back to housing and say, you guys should handle that. You guys should try to figure out how to fix this problem and not use the police. So right now we're in a really fine gray area trying to figure out what calls police should be called to and what calls they shouldn't be. But I will tell you, if you feel or anybody feels that their safety is in danger, then you should definitely be calling the police. And then talk to the dispatcher, let them know what's going on, and they can tell you. They'll be the ones to be able to evaluate the call and say, hey, call your RA, or we'll send an officer, or now our PSOs, which I think the name is going to be changing, the public safety officers. I think that name is going to be changing because of the VU. So don't remember them as that. But there'll definitely be a tiered response on campus to handle different things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to go ahead and read another question that came from YouTube. And I want to first set some contextual relevance to this question because there's a link. And the link is referring to the article that was published in the New University on 02/2/20 about the UCI alum arrested by UCI PD during the cost of living adjustment, the rally for the students, right? So this question is, why is the officer responsible for this not disbarred from service? What will UCI PD do to try and eliminate its inherent prejudice towards the BIPOC people?
So I already answered the first question.
I know.
So
I'm just,
the second question was, I think it was more about the events, special events, or
what will UCI do to try to eliminate some of the prejudice towards the BIPOC people in the community?
okay, so the assumption is that there are prejudice.
Yes.
I would say that that's not a good assumption to make. I would say that we are definitely, and as the community wants, we are definitely providing our officers with more training, implicit bias training. We're asking our campus partners to help us find more training because we're looking into all kinds of different trainings for implicit bias, inclusivity, de-escalation, and things that our community wants us to do. So if you've got suggestions on training that you think our officers could use in these areas, that'd be great. I know there was an article just recently in the paper that they did a study to see in a couple of law enforcement entities, I can't remember all of them, I think it was up more in Northern California, and they did a full-on dive into how we can find out if officers have a tendency towards biases. And they did find some officers, but 98% of the poll that they looked through showed that 98% of officers do not show tendencies towards bias. So I don't remember, you can probably just look it up at the article for police officers and bias policing. You can probably find the article there. But so we are learning different ways to look at our officers. We're also being more thorough with our backgrounds, looking more into their open source social media, see what kinds of things they're saying now, what kind of things they've said in their past. And we do that for not just our police officers, but all our employees.
Thank you very much, Chief Griffin. Would you like to, well, I'll take another question from the audience.
Yeah. Hi,
Thank you.
my name is Bree, she, her pronouns. Well, I'll start off with an easy question for you all to answer. Why'd you bring your guns today if it's supposed to be a peaceful town hall meeting?
Thank you for that question. And I'm not so sure guns necessarily take away peacefulness. I am a police officer and I'm here representing the department, so I'm wearing my full uniform.
Right, just saying it kind of feels a little threatening. Just thought I'd put that out there, but I'll continue with my next questions. Kind of following up because I don't feel like the question was particularly answered correctly. Presumably so, you say there isn't a bias towards particular communities. However, evidence has shown that is not the case. So I will reiterate the previous question. How are you aware of the racial profiling issues that have occurred in the past and currently? And to bring up, I think the grad student's name that was accosted while getting her transcripts. Her name is Shikara. She was unarmed and obviously wasn't even involved in the situation that was occurring. Even though it was a peaceful rally, I don't think it's, against anyone's First Amendment right to do. Why isn't Trish Harding facing repercussions as she should?
As I previously stated, we did a thorough investigation. We used leadership on campus to help facilitate that, using an outside entity to conduct that investigation, and there was no signs of breaking any laws or policies or procedures. So we did not discipline the officer.
But a non-threatening black woman who was picking up her transcripts in order to be cleared for whatever event she needed it for was still accosted, even though evidence shown, as you stated previously through your thorough investigation, that she wasn't doing anything wrong. So what kind of training is UCI PD really receiving in order to eliminate instances such as those? Police brutality is not, something that should be taken lightly, and it feels as though because she wasn't held accountable, nor was she disbanded from her position, that anything is actually adequately being done to make UCI a safe and inclusive campus like we're trying to make.
I also want to point out they never released Trish Harding's body cam footage, and they refused to use it in the investigation. So I don't know how thorough your investigation actually was.
So just a little bit about investigations is that they're not public record. And so the people who conducted the investigation did have access to all the body-worn camera footage, video footage in Aldridge Hall, and camera footage provided by witnesses. And they talked to all the witnesses that were willing to come forward and speak to them. So it was a thorough investigation with all the evidence considered.
Feel like that should be public knowledge, considering that this incident occurred on a public university campus. And as somebody who identifies with the Black community, that's still incredibly concerning, because I've been racially profiled by UCI PD, and that was not a very fun experience. So that is why I'm bringing up this issue, because it doesn't feel like the question is receiving an adequate answer.
Well, thank you for that. And if you felt like you were racially profiled, if you can tell me what time and day this occurred, and I can definitely look into the situation to see what happened.
Nothing actually is going to get done, so I'd rather not do that. So I will reiterate my previous question that was embedded in the rest. What kind of training is UCI PD getting to ensure that there are no racial biases?
So I think if we want to improve as a police department, as a community, we have to cooperate with each other. So by not providing that, you're not helping us be able to investigate and really look into what kind of training our officers might need, coming in contact with certain people of our community.
It's not a singular incident.
And I think the training, we do put that on our website. Again, our data dashboards and our website has a lot of information. If you want to know what kind of training we have related to all the different topics that are important to the community, you can look on our website at police.uci.edu, and it lists all the different types of training we have related to bias-based policing, racial profiling, de-escalation, and all the topics that were mentioned in that survey. That's all on the website.
Great. Closing out my questions, are mainly not really another question. Our student advocate, General Wiley, has a great pro-blackness training. I feel like the UCIPD would make really great use of that. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. On that last note, if you know, like I said, if you guys know other training that we can do that would be helpful to us, please, is that you she was referring to? Yes. Okay, if you could provide your information to Assistant Chief Cooper over there, we'd love to get you to come in and do some training. We often use other campus partners to come and do training for us here on campus. So we're held to not just the law, but the policies and procedures of the campus and our department, and all that was looked into during the investigation, and there were no violations.
If I tackle somebody at my job right now, I'm fired. Why is she not? That's just like plain and simple what it was. If I did that something right now, I would be fired. That is a very interesting standard to hold your officers by when they have the power to really do some damage to us students. And that's why we're concerning. That's why your message keeps being brought up. Even if nothing was violated, it was still grotesque.
I totally agree with you. If a officer tackled somebody without cause, then I totally agree they should be held accountable.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to bring us back and switch gears a little bit and talk about a question from the YouTube, and it's going to be for Vice Chancellor Haynes. And it's really talking about how do you think you're going to adjust for the sample bias of the safety survey? And in addition, it's basically a survey of the people who least are impacted by the impacted by the very real, desperate power consequences that the answers address. At minimum, how does the sample compare to the population encountering police, thus identify structural issues?
That's an excellent question. At the outset, I noted that the overall sample size was small. And for that reason, we have to engage with people regarding questions about their encounters with UCI PD and other services. I think when you look at how we will address it, one is outreach and communication, right? The second is to engage more people when we prepare for the next administration. But I also want to point out we're going to be sort of relating some of the findings of this survey results with some existing results, including UCUQs, right, and other types of climate surveys to get a more coherent context for understanding how people are experiencing the campus, and hopefully that will shed light on their encounters with the police, right? But there's no substitute for not engaging with people, particularly people from communities that historically are over-policed. Right?
Thank you very much.
Can I jump on that one? Because I really want to push our spider tech. So we have a survey now where anybody who comes in contact with us or anybody that calls the police department has the ability to respond to a survey, and they can do it anonymously with the QR code. So we're getting feedback from people we're actually in contact with the customers that we have, and then we're using that information to for training. We're using it for complimenting officers, and we're using it to change policies and procedures that better fit our community. Recently, we just changed one of our procedures in our dispatch center because of the surveys that we're getting back.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to take another question from the audience. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Just a few questions, and before I ask this question, I came a bit late, so apologies for that. I had a lot of other obligations. But what I noticed in the last few moments when discussing the survey, what I noticed was that though there was some desire for police officers to respond to certain things, the surveys didn't seem to include ethnicity, ethnic background, gender identity, nor sexual orientation. And I only expressed this considering that the black population on this campus is less than 2%. So I would say the primary question would be, and this is not really a question, I'm just expressing my comment here, would be who really desires the police response in regards to ethnic identity, gender, and sexual orientation. And on to my first question, I noticed in your survey also that there was a question in regards to UCI PD responding to protests. And though the students have expressed a need for moderate response, I would like to understand how is the term protest defined by the university, or whether it's defined in university policy, as well as the individuals and or team who created the survey, as well as UCI, as well as how is protest defined by UCI PD. And I would also like to know if the said terminology differentiates from the terminology for a riot, or based on what the survey is expressing, are students seeing the terminology as a protest and riot being one and the same?
So I'll just start off by saying that I do find it interesting here on campus that we kind of use the same words for protest, rally, and demonstration. We kind of use that all as one. I don't think we clump riot into there because that's a whole different situation, but it is interesting how we do kind of put that all together. Mm-hmm. And I'll let Doug talk first, and then I want to go into what we're doing now when it comes to rallies or protests or demonstrations on campus compared to what we were doing 2 years ago.
Wiley, that's a great question. I think that in the language, we made an assumption that demonstrations have broad meanings. They could be a rally. They could be a protest. The underlying assumption is that it's part of the rights of people to engage in them, right? But I think in the future instrument, we're going to have to define that more clearly so people who are completing the question will know that we are talking about activities that are within the rights of members of the campus community. At the front end of my presentation, I gave some high-level summaries of some of the responses, right? Mm-hmm. And as we work through the data, we're going to be looking at how different communities respond to the question. And by that I mean by gender, sexual orientation, race, and ethnicity. And so we'll have a better understanding about how different populations have encountered the police and what type of services that they have used, or their preferences for the type of services that the UCI Police Department should be involved in, right? But as at the front end of my presentation, I talked about we closed the survey on the 29th of April, and we're still at a very early stage of analyzing the data.
Okay, I do understand, and I'll let you continue in a moment. But understand a bit of my concern here. When it comes to a protest, this is why I kind of question a bit more why police should respond to a protest or a rally or a demonstration, considering they somewhat coincide together, considering that all three of those things are something that must be timed, they are planned, they are controlled. Only time I would understand a police officer responding, a response from the police, is when a protest started to transition more toward a riot, which is something which is spontaneous, instant, out of control, something that is not planned. Because who plans for a riot? I think that's one of the biggest concerns here. So that's why I'm very concerned with how the university defines it, considering that the police must respond to something that is planned and timed, and even requires the university's permission in a lot of cases to even do.
That's a great point, because we thought the same thing, and we got together and we put together an event management team that's run by David Ott, who is in charge of our emergency management, and it brings together HR, student life and leadership, all the different entities, undergrad, grad students, anybody who would have a rally or demonstration on campus. And we talk about how we can handle, because they are usually pre-planned. Sometimes we only hear about them a day or two ahead of time, but they are usually pre-planned. And then how can we be there to support their First Amendment right to free speech, but not necessarily have them intimidated by police officers being around. So I don't know if you've noticed lately, the last couple of demonstrations we've had, there was no police around. It was being handled by different entities across the campus. And that's what we're doing more now, is the police don't need to respond unless it turns into a riot, or if there's criminal activity happening during the demonstration, protest, or rally.
Okay, and one last point in regards to my colleague Bree, what she's expressed in regards to bias. It is a bit concerning that the individual who actually tackled that woman, that black woman, did not receive any type of charges because it just was not within the policy to do so. My thing is also, how does the university define a bias? And does the definition, this terminology, fit within the policy? Because of course it is within the policy. Does this definition coincide with how students define bias? Or is there a clear difference between how administrators and higher ups define a bias versus how students define it? Considering that, and I only ask this, considering that type of thing is far more harmful to students than it is administrators. So I don't know what y'all can answer that question, but I just felt like that was appropriate.
I appreciate that question. As I understand it, there's policy and laws that define bias. And there's a process, an investigative process that makes a determination, right? And so we're bound by that as members of a campus community. But I think you raise a point. To what extent do we have a common language and meaning about what bias means, right? And the short answer is, I don't know, but I'm certainly open to learn about it. But I think one key point is, whatever definition we have, it has to be incorporated in some type of formal policy or law, in part because we have an obligation to both prevent it as much as we can through various types of training, but also we have to have a mechanism, which we do, for people who feel if they've been subject to bias, can get relief, right?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. We can take another question from the audience.
Hi there. Forgive me, I also came in late and also am a little hard of hearing, so I might not have caught certain things. I just wanted to make sure there was not an oversampling of marginalized persons in the survey.
My understanding at this point, I don't believe it was. Right? And of course, it depends on which communities. I think that if my memory serves, the representation of different minoritized communities is below their overall representation as a part of their general population.
Great. My actual question was more about, again, definitions, and just based upon some, sort of recent work that's come out, the concept of safety is pretty radically changed in the course of the pandemic. And so I was also wondering what working definition that you were working with safety and force, and if that's actually changed in the course of the pandemic.
I'll just add what I described at the outset. So part of the work of the campus safety work group that includes stakeholders from across the campus focus on defining what we mean by safety. And we arrived at a definition that is organized around three principles: safety, security, and justice. And it's a far more inclusive definition, because safety, we live in a city that's very safe according to some metrics, but not all people feel safe, right? And so part of the definition of safety combines not simply physical safety, but identity safety, right? And I also noted that this is a fairly novel definition basically for any campus in the system that will involve more and more people engaging with it, right? Because ultimately, we can't truly be that safe community if community members within the campus aren't safe. And once we learn more about that, we work to address that to the extent that we can.
Thank you very much. We'll take another question from the audience.
Hello. So I have a number of questions, so please bear with me. But so my first question is, so across the nation, the definition of what a hate crime is radically different depending on where you are. And even in California, there isn't really an agreement on what that kind of definition is. I'm not sure if this question would be more appropriate for Vice Chancellor Haynes or Chief of Police Griffin, but what is the formal definition of a hate incident or hate crime that UCI uses in its day-to-day operations?
Dr. Haynes is looking at me, so I'll take that one. So, I was just having that discussion with our records at the police department today, because the way the national database describes it's a little bit different than California law. And let me try to explain it as easy as possible. So the difference between a hate crime and a hate incident. So a hate crime is a crime has to occur, and the crime had to occur based on the bias of the person committing the crime. So there has to be a victim to that. A hate incident would be something that didn't occur. For example, not a crime, I'm sorry, when a crime doesn't occur, but it's related to hate speech or some type of hate. I guess hate speech is the best way to say it, because there's so many forms of speech. If somebody does a chalking on the ground, a swastika on the ground, chalking, well, that's not really a crime, but it is considered hate speech or a hate incident rather than a hate crime. An example of a crime, you have a white person and a black person getting into a fight. And during that fight, there's racial slurs said during that fight. But the fight is over the girlfriend that they're both dating, right? So the crime occurred. There was some hate speech during that crime, but the crime didn't occur based on the bias of the perpetrator, right? I just totally confused it all, didn't I? But I guess that's the best way I can explain it, is that for a hate crime to happen, a crime has to occur, and that crime has to be based on the person's bias.
Okay, so then this next question is based kind of on the assumption that UCIPD will react to crimes, because I believe that's what UCIPD is meant to do. So the survey kind of showed that a lot of students were inclined to say that UCIPD has a responsibility to respond to hate crimes. as a personal note, I don't believe in that. I don't think it's entirely appropriate. But aside from that, as the current chief of police, what do you think is the responsibility of UCI PD to respond to hate incidents that don't fall into the definition of crime that you described? And when I say respond, I'd like to clarify that I do mean steps outside investigations, because as many other people have pointed out, investigations don't really tend to go anywhere. And so I'm more talking about either disciplinary actions, preemptive measures, trainings, things like that.
That's a great question. We respond to all hate crimes, hate incident, hate speech. We work with our campus partners. Many times facilities will find something on a wall that's inappropriate. They'll take a picture of it, remove it, and then send it to us and work with us on looking into it. So whether it's a crime or an incident or just hate speech, we look into all of that. Somebody brought up the recent white power paraphernalia that's been slap tagged all around campus. We looked into that. Although we couldn't prove who did it, we had a good idea who did, and we banned them from the campus. So we do respond to those. Not necessarily, there was no crime that we connected to, or the investigation didn't lead to somebody being arrested, but we still respond, and we still are doing everything we can to protect the campus. And we also work closely with the whistleblower office for the campus climate as well. When any incidents come up like that, we're always communicating between Dr. Haynes' office, the ethics office, and myself to figure out ways that we can handle that and support the people who are impacted by those.
My next question is actually for Vice Chancellor Haynes. So, and this question isn't meant to disparage any of the work, the wonderful work that you and your staff do, but from a student perspective, it does seem a lot like your office really only has two purposes. One is to release periodic statements on a Heritage Month or an event, and the other is to be tacked on at the end of a UCI PD report saying this is a resource you can reach out to. And so while I think being a resource is extremely important, I also think if we're talking about public safety and community safety, that an important thing to do is make sure that the Office of Inclusive Excellence is extremely active rather than being seen kind of as an afterthought in like the campus system. So what plans do you have, given all these survey results, to be a more active force, aside from what you've already mentioned being the course that's been planned?
I really appreciate that, and I don't take it in a negative way. I think we could all improve. But I think it's noteworthy. We do four things, and most of it's voluntary, right? And so you can choose to engage with it or not, right? And so we do accountability, education and training, responsive research, certificate program. And I just want to make a comment, and it's not a criticism. When we put out a statement on the Heritage Month, we take that very seriously. We did that for API month, which is this month. And we do that because we're trying to communicate that UCI consists of many communities. And we do that to celebrate our diversity. And so it's not something that we sort of take casually, right? And I hope that the whole community of UCI takes it in the spirit that it's offered. But I can't control that.
Yeah.
I'd just like to add a few things to that. I want to be clear that Vice Chancellor Haynes has been very involved in our development of our community safety plan and working with that group, helping develop the framework that we're working from. And his team has been involved in many things that perhaps might be behind the scenes a little bit, but through a forum like this, we can help bring that forward and let you know some of the work that's being done. So thank you.
I do have two more questions. But I'm fine waiting.
One more, please.
Okay, then I guess I'll direct it to Vice Chancellor Collin. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. But a big concern, I guess, with the results of the survey is that it will involve hiring a multitude of professionals, I'm guessing, because the survey does seem to imply that students favor hiring mental health professionals, including trainings, and all of that will take an amount of budget. And so with that being considered, if a slash to UCI PD's budget isn't in consideration, because that seems to be the general consideration for the time being, how will all of this be financed if you want to take student concerns into consideration?
Sure. Well, thank you for the question. And, I think the survey is still in its infancy, so Doug and his team are still evaluating what does that mean, what are the results. There may need to be additional surveys and information done. But it's not necessarily all that we have to do everything and we have to build up our teams. In some instances, we may have to do that. We are looking to partner with community partners, such as we're exploring a relationship with BULOC, which can help provide mental health services, and other entities that are in the community. And so, yes, we might have to put more money and funding into certain areas. We might need to trade money and move things from one area into more focus on another area. And those are things that we are developing and will take time to go through. But I think the important thing is that UCI has a commitment to its students, its faculty, its staff, and making sure that we are creating this safe environment, and that safe holistic term is very broad in nature. And so we're looking at ways we can do that, but hopefully without spending too much of our resources.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. It is 4:55 and we need to end this event. So I'm going to encourage those who have questions to reach out to PSAC, so psac@uci.edu, and we can address those questions with everyone up here. And also, I just really want to say thank you for everyone for creating a space for us. This is just the beginning. We need to have more of these dialogues. We need to talk about the survey. We need to look at the aggregates, like all of these things. This is just the beginning of one conversation. So I'm very grateful for everyone for being here and setting up the first of many conversations in person, right? We haven't been in person for a very long time, and it's a very different feeling when we can see and feel emotions and be grounded with one another in this community versus being a Jeopardy box. So thank you so much for being here. I'm grateful for everyone for their time. I want to do a special thanks for Mary and her team and everyone else for helping us with the event. And thank you for everyone on the panelists. And take a moment and talk to, we also have the AGS President-elect Reginald's here, and we have ACU-SUI represented. Please take a moment and communicate with them, because they are also on PSAC, so they have a direct link to open communications with all of us. So thank you so much for coming. Look forward to seeing you more, and thank you.